This is the second of a three-part series of videos discussing HotDocs parameters and local variables. If you have watched the first video in the series, you saw how we were able to create a base or generic computation stringing together the various parts of an officer's name, and then we created separate computations based on that generic computation and leveraging the parameters within that computation uh, to list those names appropriately in the assembled document. We're going to look at another example of how we can use parameters, a slightly different context here. You can see in this second example, it looks like we're going to be listing various dollar amounts that look like they might come from a banking or commercial lending type document. And I'm just going to show you what I've already done here in the interview to kind of set things up. I've got a dialog called loan information asking for those four amounts. I enter the amounts here as numbers because they are number variables. And in the resulting document, looking at it here in document preview, you can see those numbers are listed parenthetically on each of these lines. But notice that I have some bracketed text here preceding the actual numbers in parentheses. Indicating that these dollar amounts need to be written out. And this is often a requirement in these types of documents. A dollar amount needs to be written out a certain way. Oftentimes, it's written out in a format that, the same kind of format that you use, say, to write out a check. And then, of course, the actual dollar amount appears afterward in parentheses. And we want to implement that here in this second example. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up creating computations here to write out the dollar amounts preceding the actual dollar amounts in parentheses. Now again, to keep things moving along, I've already created a script in a computation, and I'm just going to pull that over here so that you can see it. I've called it generic amount written out, or words, something within the variable name to indicate that this is a computation that strings that out using a specific format. Now this particular format, again, the kind that you would use in writing a check, so 10 and 10/$100, is not a format that you can easily implement using, say, the default format, creating your own default format. There's nothing here that would really be conducive to allowing for this kind of format for written out numbers. So oftentimes we create computations to do this. And so this computation does precisely that. It takes the number and it fleshes it out. You don't need to worry so much about what's going on here within the script itself, except for the references here to what we're calling the generic amount. This represents the actual dollar amount on which this script is going to be operating. So again, what we could do, and this is referring back to a point I made in the previous video, we could create four separate computations with this script. And then of course, the referenced amount here would simply be, for example, the actual loan amount number variable, the late fee number variable, etc. Instead, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the Locals tab. So this is a review of what we did in the first video in the series. And it's here where I am going to create a parameter called generic amount. So I simply type in generic amount. It's just going to match the text that I've already placed in my script. In the first video in the series, I created a text-based parameter. This time I'm going to create a number-based parameter. Okay, so it will ultimately have a number value on which the script will act. So one parameter is all we need for this particular example. If I jump back to the Properties tab, you'll notice now the words generic amount, which previously were just there in black text, are now bold and blue. Again, the indication to you that those references are in reference to parameters that we've created on the Locals tab. This is now a valid computation, and I can click on OK. And now I can go through and create the four separate computations that will write out the loan amount, the late fee, the prepayment penalty, and the payoff amount. Now I've set this up so that I can highlight all of this bracketed text. And if I go to the variable field button now, because that text is in brackets, you may have seen this in your own development or perhaps in other exercises and other videos, whatever's in the bracketed or whatever text is in brackets is automatically suggested as the name of the variable field that you're going to be creating. I haven't created this computation yet, so first things first, I need to switch my variable type from text to computation because this will be a computation variable. I'm going to go ahead and click on the editor button. And as I did in the first exercise of the first example, the first video in this sequence, I'm simply going to reference or drag up into the script box the generic computation that I just created, the one that has the generic amount parameter in it. When I do that, you can see that one parameter, that one number-based parameter there in parentheses. And as you saw in the first video, what we'll need to do here, since we're creating a computation to write out the loan amount, so we're going to grab the loan amount number variable, and we're going to do a drag and drop onto that number parameter or placeholder. And then click on OK. We'll go ahead and click on replace once here, and we'll repeat that process for the other three. So for late fee, again, this is going to be the late fee written computation. I'm going to pull up the generic amount computation referencing the parameter. I'm going to find the late fee number variable, drop that on that parameter or placeholder, click on OK, rinse and repeat. So we'll do that for the prepayment penalty as well. And the prepayment penalty number variable is used there to replace that parameter. And then finally, we will do payoff amount. So all I'm doing in setting this up is referencing that generic computation with the parameter that I created and just replacing that one parameter with an actual HotDocs variable. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. I'm going to click on replace. Now that I've got those computations all created, I can click on the save button to update the interview. Again, because I had already put these amounts in here, but notice now in document preview, those numbers are written out based on what I put in for values there in the interview. Now I might want to put the word dollars here in between those two fields out in the template, but hopefully you get the idea. Now, the alternative way of doing this and the way we had to do this prior to the introduction of parameters in HotDocs developer, we had to go through and in these different computations, let me just get back into the loan amount computation, we'd have to have the same script that I put in this generic computation. We'd have to have this whole block in here, and then of course loan amount, the loan amount number variable in this case would be where generic amount currently is. And I'd have to have, in effect, 4 different instances of that same script in these 4 computation variables. And that wouldn't be terribly difficult to set up, but if you've got lots of different computations that use the same script, and for whatever reason, in the course of maintenance or further template development, you need to make a change to that script, you're going to have to go through each one of those computations and modify the script accordingly. Well, with this setup, it makes it very easy to modify the underlying base or generic computation. Let's just say, rather than have this written out, say in title caps, I want it to be in all caps. So I'm going into the generic or base computation, and I'm changing my format here from title caps to all caps. And maybe I do it here as well. So everything, every word that becomes part of the string that lands in the assembled document now is going to be in all caps. Maybe I need to do it here for this one as well. Or more precisely, maybe I just want the dollar amount to be written out, and the rest of this I could just leave well enough alone. So let's say the and can stay lowercase, but everything else needs to change. So I've modified the base computation. I click on OK. I don't need to do anything to the other 4 computations that use that base computation. So now when I click on save, you can see I've made one change in the base computation, but every computation that leverages it thereafter has been changed. So conceptually, this is very similar to the idea behind insert templates. If you're familiar with insert templates, you know that you isolate text within its own template. That text is used in multiple different document types, so it's inserted into other templates during the course of assembly of documents. And the chief advantage there is that if you ever need to make a change to the text or the provisions within that insert template, you just go right to the insert template. You make the change there once, and it's effective everywhere that text is used thereafter. Same sort of concept at work here with regard to parameters and creating, in this example, base computations that other computations will use or reference in the course of assembling a document.